Welcome to the REDx series. Report, engage, decide. Featuring a presentation by
Dr. Keith Rowley.
The right choice for TNT. PNM.
Fellow citizens, I come to you at the end of a 5-year term. A term that started in September 2015. We are now in July 2020. This, for me and for you and for the nation, has been easily one of the most difficult 5-year periods that this country has ever experienced. During this period, we faced a number of challenges. We started in 2015 with the collapsing of our revenue base in oil and gas. We started with a depleted treasury. We had to face during this 5-year period the challenges of an invasion from South America, Venezuelans visiting us in numbers larger than we were comfortable with. We also had during the period significant collapses of the international market for our major products. We had also to face the CLICO abandonment of its responsibility for the bailout resources. We also had to confront the date, a date on the calendar with respect to the payment of unserviceable Petrotrin debt. These were some of the challenges that we had along the way. But as we've done before, with many other challenges in an earlier time, we stood up to these challenges and had the decisions made which allowed us to be in a position of improvement by 2019. But as we enter 2020, alongside these major challenges, we had to cope with a pandemic. COVID-19 took charge of our decision-making process simply because it was a situation of saving lives and livelihood. We had to experience a shutting down of our country, funding of our population in a way to give households sustenance, and of course, to preserve our well-being in such a way that when it's all over, we can restart our lives and our livelihoods, and of course, look to a brighter future. As we do that, we do so knowing that the world has changed forever, and we may never see something like this again in our lifetime. And we also know that we can only come out of this if we accept that we are all in this together. It has been for me a pleasure to lead you and to see you accept the leadership that we provided, agree to act on the responsibility of our people, and acknowledge that we had to share as we did during the Greenvale floods, that we are all our brother's keeper, and that we also ensure that in whatever we do, we leave no one behind. These are the thoughts and considerations that we take into this general election of 2020. We are all in this together. It's against that background that the government of Trinidad and Tobago immediately sought the technical expertise and experience of a 22-man and woman team made up of the best talent available to us, and who were willing to take on the responsibility of creating a roadmap to recovery post-COVID. I want on this occasion to thank all those and other citizens who have come to the fore in this time of national need. Ladies and gentlemen, the assignment of this committee was to look at what was available to us and ensure that the recommendations made to the government were such that as we responded to the threat of the virus, that no one was left behind. And of course, as we do that, we wanted to ensure that we didn't only survive, but that we maintain the possibility of returning once the virus was outside of our borders or restrained within our borders, that we would come back out from the lockdown to an economy that we could reignite and to a society that we can transform. But before we go into the details of what that roadmap is pointing us to, it's important for us to have a feel and a knowledge of where we've been, where we're at, and even what caused us to be in those situations. But most importantly, to be able to appreciate where we are going from the place of January 2020 to the future of 2021 and beyond. There's no gainsaying the fact that the vast majority of the revenues that come to the government and people of Trinidad and Tobago come from the energy sector. This graph shows you in stark graphical form our circumstances 2014 to 2020. The red is our energy company's tax revenue. Now there are a variety of components of our income or revenue from the energy sector. This is just the tax situation. In 2014, that tax was $14 billion. There was a change of government in 2015 during that year, from 2014, 14 billion to 10.6 billion in 2015. But that was falling, continued to fall. And by 2016, 1 year, first year of this government, that tax base had fallen to $1 billion. It was during this period that I, as a new Prime Minister, received a visit from a major oil company to advise me that as a result of incentive changes made to the tax regime in the energy sector, we cannot or should not anticipate or expect any tax revenue of any substantial amount until 2024. Facing that situation, which continued like this, 2017, $500 million. 2018, we were able to raise it by initiatives taken here to 2.1 billion, and then 3.7 billion in 2019. And of course, with the coming of COVID, and with the effects of the incentive to the oil companies, 3.3 billion. It is important to note that that incentive was meant to correct a problem, but it created its own problems. For us, it might have solved a problem for the oil companies in terms of incentive to drill in their business, but in terms of revenues to the treasury in Trinidad and Tobago, the blue sections you see here is the loss of taxation revenues as a result of that incentive. And of course, the green sections were losses as a result of falling market prices. Those incentives, which were meant to stimulate oil company activity in the oil sector, had the effect of reducing tax revenue by the quantum of this bright blue that you're seeing here. That was the government's attempt to incentivize oil companies. The green, or turquoise, as if you might see it that way, this color is loss of revenue as a result of loss of oil prices and gas prices because of the international market decline. Faced with that situation, the government had to act to improve our revenue situation. And your government took a number of initiatives which were intended to improve the desperate conditions that I just pointed out to you, where our revenues were $500 million, $1 billion from taxes. So here you see 2016, the total revenue, not just tax and royalties and whatever else the company pay. We pushed that up, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, going in the right direction. So the decision that we have made, we're improving that tax situation. This graph is interesting because it points to the pre-COVID economy. It shows what we have been doing before we knew anything about COVID. This was the situation with the economy in Trinidad and Tobago as seen by the World Bank. This is the IMF growth forecast for 2019. We would have come from here in 2017. We were here in 2018, here in 2019, projecting to be here in 2020. But instead of realizing this in 2020, COVID arrived on the scene and did this to us. This is where we are in 2020. Clearly, the assignment given to us as a people, given to the committee to design the roadmap, is an assignment to get our country out of this situation to a projection here for 2021. Fellow citizens, these graphs are intended to demonstrate the degree of difficulty that this administration had to deal with. I pointed out to you before the effect of government decision on incentivizing oil companies with an intention to increase their participation or involvement in Trinidad and Tobago's oil sector, that over time amounted to this $40 billion we're looking at here. Of course, during that period, we had to treat with the CLECO bailout, the CLECO fallout, which took place earlier, but for which our monies were out and needed to be recovered. Of course, somewhere here, between these two, was the Petrotrin situation, where, backed by the Minister of Finance, a guarantor, Petrotrin was required in a specific time, on a specific date during this government's term, to provide a payment of $850 million in August of 2019. And before that, after that I should say, after that, we had the coming of COVID, which required a huge response, $15 billion worth of response. This, I would say, required a government that could have and did treat with major issues with respect to the management of the affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. And on every occasion, we have made the decisions, difficult as they are, to give the people of Trinidad and Tobago the best outcome. In the case of this oil company situation, we publicly stated that the terms of engagement were not to our satisfaction, and we engaged in significant conversations and negotiations and renegotiations with oil companies at their headquarters. As head of the government, I traveled to the boardrooms around the world to indicate to these companies that while we are happy that they are doing well for their shareholders, that I too have shareholders, you the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and that we all need to prosper. from the resources of Trinidad and Tobago. And I can report to you today that they understood that approach. They understood what fairness means. And in the end, we can report to tell you that we have struck new arrangements, new formulae for determining how the proceeds of our oil companies share their profits with the people of Trinidad and Tobago, sharing the benefits, changing the prices, and of course, collecting some revenue which flowed from the renegotiation of those terms and conditions of trading with these companies. The Minister of Finance, in his presentation, will tell you exactly what we recovered in those negotiations. And more importantly, going forward and applying these new formulae, we are in line to earn more from what we trade with these companies in the international marketplace. With respect to CLICO, we in this term face what no other government faced. The CLICO principles attempted to disown the debt of $25 billion. $25 billion of taxpayers' money, which was used to bail out a private company. We only recovered $8 billion from the sale of a methanol business outside of Trinidad and Tobago. The rest of it was still out there. And we had to face a challenge from the private owners who took action. Firstly, they refused to sign the document acknowledging the debt, which they've signed for 17 years. But in this situation, under this government, they refused to sign it. Secondly, they organized themselves with the intention to throw the government off the board and out of the chairmanship of the companies that had the assets against which that bailout took place. We were forced to go to court to fight those initiatives in court against the advice of many naysayers and advisors who gave us gratuitous advice and predicted failure. Today I can report to you that we succeeded. We liquidated CLF and recovered for the people of Trinidad and Tobago assets worth $15 billion. And what did we do with those assets? $8 billion of that recovery we used to create the National Investment Fund. That National Investment Fund attracted a large cross-section of the population who are today owners of those assets by way of the bonds that they hold. And the fund has done particularly well, and to date has paid out over $300 million in dividends to those in the national population who own those shares. And of course, the Ministry of Finance had recovered over $4 billion in the sale of those bonds. That is a success story that we had not anticipated when we started out, but it came to pass. That is a CLICO story as of today. This deficit was the Minister of Finance intervening to find and provide the funding that was necessary to keep businesses and households in funds and to keep our economy alive while we locked down the entire country. Something completely unanticipated, but something that we had to do if we were going to survive a virus that threatened our lives and our livelihood. We've all experienced it, and it's a story that we'll tell our children, but it cost a lot of money. Money we didn't have, money we had to borrow and make available to all sectors of our society, under the instructions to the planners and to the cabinet that we would leave no one behind. Our short-term objectives of the roadmap which we've constructed had 4 components. Component number one was preserving lives and conditions of living, social services to families and households under our commitment to leave no one behind. Objective number two was to preserve the jobs that we had and to create opportunities for new jobs so that we can have an economy that will come back into operations, maintaining those jobs and creating opportunities. But the third objective was to stimulate aggregate demand so that there can be an economy serving the population, sustaining jobs. And the fourth objective was to minimize and rectify the effects of the disruption of the shutdown. Those were our objectives in the short term on the roadmap to recovery, which we have constructed using our national talent pool. This experience has forced us to focus on the role of technology in transforming how services are delivered in our country, and it has forced us to commit, as we have done, to a digital age of transformation, which forms part of the phase 2 and beyond, which you will observe that our commitment is to make full use of technology, as we have already done in the Attorney General's office, which is completely digitized. All its data, its records are digitized. The cabinet, which now no longer uses paper. And our expectation is that every government department would be interconnected, and there will be an e-identity, electronic identity, for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. And that would allow us to be able to identify and to interact with government departments and the private sector for that matter, using our technology from our phones, where you no longer would be required to have a pile of forms or go to an office to make an application or to stand up in a line for 3 hours to pay a bill. And we are saying that if we take this situation now and make the most of it, we anticipate that by 2022, going through changes in 2021, that you will not be able to recognize the public service in Trinidad and Tobago or the way we do business. And we are aiming to go as far as to have e-books in our schools, where our children will no longer be carrying 40 pounds of books on their back, but we'll have electronic blackboards in the writing boards in the school, and the children will have e-books, which are easier to manipulate, easier to find data, and easier to study from. That is where Trinidad and Tobago is going. And this is not new to us. We're just accelerating that anticipation because we had already taken steps. Of course, we are saying that those can be made things of the past because the technology allows us to make those kinds of management systems obsolete. Going digital, e-identity is the objective for Trinidad and Tobago 2021 into 2022. We committed to that. With respect to the agricultural sector, the recommendations coming to us in phase 1 is that we need to launch an immediate agricultural stimulus package of $500 million to support rapid and targeted expansion in production, marketing and distribution of selected high-demand agricultural commodities. If COVID did nothing, it exposed us to the vulnerabilities of a country that is dependent on others for our food supply. When we ordered food from abroad, whether it is rice or whatever, and were told in the COVID panic that persons who normally supply us are not in a position to accept our order, then it came home to us that we should not only be talking about agriculture, we should be doing about agriculture. And the response from the national community has been very interesting. The government, in the program in this time, encouraged the population through massive seed delivery. And it was very heartening and instructive to see how many individuals and households got into the backyard and began to put seeds into the ground. We also were at a leisurely pace, making that change to improving our national agricultural production. We have some investments being made in livestock, investments being made in poultry, investment being made in other kinds of agricultural involvement, but much too slowly. COVID has created a fierce urgency, which is understood by the country now. And as a result of that, we're in a position not just to talk, but to strengthen linkages along the food value chain, the distribution chain, and for local production to replace imports. And in that way, we are very pleased that we were on that track, because a few days ago, I was able to open for the first time in this country an agro-processing and technology park in Moruga. And the farmers around there, led by the pineapple farmers, are eager to take their place in those factory shelves and to grow and to produce in larger numbers, to improve our food supply, to put more food on our shelves, and even to export packaged foodstuff made in Trinidad and Tobago. That is how we will encourage the farmers, put good quality food in our hospitals from our fields, and protective services, whether it is the Defense Force or wherever else, that we grow what we eat and we eat what we grow. The people of Trinidad and Tobago are now eager to not just talk about farming, but to engage in farming. And the biggest incentive that the government has produced is one that says agriculture, the agricultural sector, is a tax-free area. Whatever you do in agriculture, the profit is yours. The taxman does not take any of it. That is the best incentive. And we expect that the private sector, as they have already begun to do, will invest more heavily in food production and food supply. And we expect that the users of food products in this country would see us tailoring our diet in that direction. Agriculture is on the move. Another area of interesting activity, which we were again already engaged in, because we understand that one of the best areas for the creating of job opportunities is the construction sector. And we had already been doing that. But the advice in phase one on the priority initiatives, phase one of our roadmap to recovery, indicates that we urgently need to restart government projects that have already commenced. The exercise done by the team, viewed by the cabinet, identify a total of 527 projects, construction projects, engaging thousands of workers across the country, injecting $3.2 billion in the economy. That has been identified as a work program, much of it already underway, and we will sustain that. It also points out that given the strictures and the requirement to do more with less, that some projects need to be reviewed and reprioritized. And where projects are found not to be of the highest priority, they be pruned or replaced by other projects. But there's a commitment to use the construction sector to keep stimulating the economy as we go forward on this road to recovery. We have a number of projects, but to get the contractors as business houses to play their part in this, the business community in the contracting sector had to have their debts settled, contractors had to be paid outstanding monies, and the government has been actively engaged in doing that. In the oil sector, Heritage is beginning now to service some debts that they were carrying. We also have the state enterprise sector where there were significant government debts, particularly to small and medium enterprises. We are trying to dispense with that at the moment, so a fair amount of money is coming to these contractors now. We cannot leisurely service these debts given the demands of the COVID environment. So out of evil commit, good. But that servicing in such large volumes at this time is being done by significant borrowings by the Minister of Finance. And that is why we are talking about the need to be responsible going forward, because we are making these commitments now to give us the stimuli, to give us the catalyst to do what has to be done so that the Trinidad and Tobago economy could not only survive, but grow as we go into 2021 and 2022. As the committee examined the options available to the country, it did have the opportunity to look at what was already in the pipeline with respect to government-funded construction. We refer to what we call shovel-ready projects. And the recommendation made is that we should facilitate these shovel-ready projects, and they identified projects of $600 million worth, which need to be pursued and reduce the time for regulatory approval and early startup in construction projects. That will allow us to bring people onto these jobs and to get these kinds of allocations working on construction sites, and that is where the economic recovery would be stimulated in the construction sector. These are recommendations made by the committee and accepted by the government, and work is already underway in a significant number of locations where construction. We've come out of the lockdown very carefully, very gingerly. We put different arrangements in place to protect the staff, and I'm pleased to have observed how the private sector has responded to this, and the public sector. And as we go forward, we strengthen our position, and there are a number of projects out there which will redound to the benefit of the population being funded in this time. So even though it's a period of uncertainty initially, a period of stringency, a period of insufficient funding, we are ensuring that whatever funding is available, we do more with less. Unsurprisingly, another area which attracted the attention of the committee and the large number of subcommittees is the energy sector, being our main revenue earner, largest chunk of our national economy. And these were the recommendations: an urgent assessment of sustainability of the gas value chain and progression of discussions and negotiations to ensure a competitive, viable and sustainable investment sector. This is what they say should be our priority. I can report to you that much of that was already underway, but being now stimulated. And we're pleased to know that this is the recommendation, because with respect to the gas value chain and the discussions and negotiations, they have been going on. And with respect to dealing specifically with gas pricing, the government of Trinidad and Tobago had already taken steps, and we now have on board an international company whose expertise it is to advise governments to deal with this question of the gas value chain. We are in that, and that's the recommendation. So the work is already going on, or we are taking the steps to allow it to go on. And with respect to sustainable investment in the sector, I want to point out that Trinidad and Tobago is one of the few places in the world where oil companies, the large oil companies, would have committed to do exploration in the deep water and are continuing so to do in Trinidad and Tobago. So the sustainable investment environment remains in Trinidad and Tobago, and as we go forward, you will be advised of the individual actions being taken off our East Coast and also our South Coast, where BHP, Shell and BP are in fact maintaining significant levels of investment. We also advised by our committee, the National Committee, made up of people not only from the PNM, not only from this government, but people with experience and expertise that is part of the national talent pool. They are telling us that we need to stimulate activity in the sector through maintaining the schedule of ongoing projects and the acceleration of planned projects. I'm pleased to report that while there have been shutdowns and reductions, large reductions elsewhere in the world, in Trinidad and Tobago, by and large, our international companies operating in Trinidad and Tobago have maintained their commitment And this is what is being recommended here. So I can tell you it is happening. One company, Shell, was trying to accelerate beyond a certain level by bringing in 2 rigs. They delayed one, but one is coming in or being in, and that one will do more than it was anticipated to do. But the level of investment as committed by Shell remains very high, and they remain in contact with the commitment that they've made to do the Manatee project, which is one that we have moved from stagnation for 17 years, where we were trying to do a project only with the approvals of the Venezuelans, because we're going to go in partnership, given what has become of the politics and the economy of Venezuela and the possibilities of not doing that because of sanctions against Venezuela. We have been able, this government through diplomacy, to disengage from this unitization, and we have got the approval of the Venezuelan government that Trinidad and Tobago, using Shell as the operator, could proceed to extract our portion of the Manatee field while the Loran field remains with Venezuela. These are the kinds of diplomacy that we've done. These are the kinds of outcomes, and this is what tells us that we can continue into the medium term with Shell maintaining its investment level. And of course, we have to provide liquidity support for the energy services subsector, a subsector which dates back many, many decades in some instances, and we need to preserve that as part of our local, what we call, we speak in terms of local content. We need to keep that subsector operational and, of course, settle Petrotrin's debt to suppliers and contractors. We have given that priority, and we are now just on the verge of being able to discharge this commitment to those subcontractors of Petrotrin, where Heritage is servicing that debt and Petrotrin itself is servicing some of the debt that is owed. That's part of the assignment, getting more money into the economy and accelerating the rate at which those debts are being discharged. With respect to the downstream and upstream relationships, the recommendation is that we maintain the schedule on major upstream projects and implement selected downstream maintenance activity. This too is going on in the context of this recommendation, but unfortunately, we have suffered and are suffering some reductions in operations on some plants at Point Lisas, not because of anything other than the reduction in the international demand for some of those products. Some producers in Point Lisas are finding difficulty finding buyers for their produce, and the reasonable response is to reduce the production levels. We hope that this is a short-term situation, and as the economies around the world recover and have more demand for these produce, that the production in Trinidad and Tobago will be restarted or increased so that we can continue to play our role in the international marketplace once international prices and demands allow, and we will then see our economy improved in this sector of the downstream. As we have committed during this election campaign, members of the cabinet will report to the national community. So in this situation, the Minister of Trade and Industry can give you a little more detail as to what we have done with respect to NEDCO, where there's a $35 million supply, $220,000 being the upper limit available to support small enterprises and micro enterprises. We've also got some issues, positive issues with the UWI Ventures Limited, but I leave that for the Minister of Trade and Industry, who will give you her report on what we have done and what we are doing with respect to supporting initiatives in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Tobago is always in line for special treatment. There are those who believe that it's preferential treatment, but Tobagoans will always remind such persons that the country is Trinidad and Tobago. In this period of the COVID challenges, the recommendation from the committee that's designed the roadmap for Trinidad and Tobago has said that we need to accelerate the implementation of key construction projects in Tobago. That recommendation, like many others, is in sync with what we have already been doing. So it is saying to us, continue along that path. In Tobago, we can point to a significant number of investment projects meant to improve the quality of healthcare delivery in Tobago. We have the Roxborough Hospital, which is 40% complete. We are completing the long-awaited Roxborough Fire Station, which is due to be handed over at the end of this month. During the period, we also committed and are now starting the project to construct a new terminal building. Major investment funded by the CAF, pursued by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Tourism and the Tobago House of Assembly in the last 2 years or so. We are about now to take this recommendation seriously with respect to the A&R Robinson terminal building construction. And we also are making available fair amounts of monies for access roads so that we can incentivize agriculture simply by allowing people to get to their lands. And we did provide a $50 million support grant to those who are involved in the hotel industry, for which the COVID had virtually brought the business to a halt, where we provided that fund so that they could do preparations in anticipation of opening, which is now taking place. The 2 major hotels in Tobago are just about to reopen their doors because since March, they have been closed, and the employees, many of them were not sure what their future held. But government support, as in the case of the Magdalena, we have kept the Magdalena staff like we did with the Hilton and the Hyatt, as we asked the private sector to keep workers on, not use the opportunity of the COVID to shed workers. The government did that, and by example, we kept the workers on in these 3 hotels. But we've also taken steps to make the Magdalena more attractive as a family hotel, because the $20 million breakwater that was required, we can finally announce that it has been built, and beaches are being built around the Magdalena, albeit that they're being smothered by seaweed for the moment. But we anticipate that very soon, the Magdalena would be a destination not only for Trinidad and Tobago people, but for the internationals who will come when the airlines begin to fly again. And may I congratulate those in Tobago for receiving the commendation from Europeans and others who today have designated Tobago a safe area in the world. Tobago has been designated by those who supply us with tourists as a safe place to go. That is quite an accomplishment in a pandemic in 2020. There are lots of other things happening in Tobago, but I simply would summarize that by saying to my colleagues, my fellow citizens in Trinidad, Tobago is open for business. And very soon, that business can be reached on a brand new ferry, the APT James, that is due here in a matter of a few weeks. I haven't got an exact date at the moment, but that vessel is being outfitted, bought, and paid for by the actions and diplomacy of Trinidad and Tobago with Australia, where we have 4 vessels under construction, 2 ferries, the APT James, which is ready, the Boku Reef, which is a little further behind, and due here in early part of 2021. And of course, somewhere along the way, we expect to have our 2 Coast Guard vessels, which have not yet been named. But when they get here, we'll be in a much better position to protect our borders and to protect us from those who may harm us by their improper entry. The future for Tobago is bright. The future of Trinidad and Tobago continues to be bright. And this report is us speaking about our boundless faith in our destiny, even as we are making our way out of a pandemic, something that hasn't happened for 100 years. And of course, given all the difficult decisions we had to make, this is the government that had to make the decision in a pandemic. Couldn't have had a better government in office. As I speak of the energy sector, the Petrotrin situation is of such national import that it requires some further in-depth examination. This graph and animation demonstrates how we have been doing business in the energy sector, where we had a company called Petrotrin engaged in these three areas of activity: fuel sales, refined product, exploration, drilling and exploration, refining, and of course it's owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, whose treasury is available to this business. I want the people of South Trinidad in particular, where this business was located, to take a moment and view this in the context of the national population, where two components of this company, Petrotrin, fuel sales was profitable here, drilling and exploration was profitable here, refining was using up whatever were the proceeds of these two operations. And there were times when this operation had so used up all of this that it required to come to the treasury so that money could flow from here to there. We had done that for so long, and by governments not making the rectification required, for whatever reason, that this company ran up $22 billion in debt. The last write-down being $6 billion last year, when through accounting procedures, they were forced to take those debt off their books. And of course, this government in this administration, unlike any other government, did not have the wherewithal to postpone the restructuring of this company. Even if we wanted to do it, we could not postpone it because the payment of foreign debt had a date on it, whereas before you could just roll it over and go down the road. $850 million were due against the background of the kinds of revenue shocks that I mentioned earlier in this presentation. So this government, taking the hard decisions that we've taken around the country in other matters, had to do this one as well. And I have no doubt that in taking those decisions, it negatively impacted on some families and some businesses and so on. But this is a rectification that had to come. We anticipate that the dislocation and the pain is temporary. But look at what we have done. Here it is. We have created two companies, one here and one there. This one, Paria, is profitable. This one, Heritage, is profitable. The profitability of Heritage has allowed us, as a result of the restructuring, to face the challenge of the Petrotrin debt and a future of prosperity, not just for the company, but for Trinidad and Tobago. Before I go on to the outcome of this action of restructuring Petrotrin, not closing down Petrotrin, we restructured the company from an arrangement that was negative to one that is positive. But in so doing, fully cognizant of the effect that such an action would have on those who were directly involved, the employees, the government found the resources to pay $2.6 billion in severance payments to the approximately just under 4,000 Petrotrin workers who were entitled, permanent and temporary workers, received that benefit. And of course, we went further. We committed in this restructuring to make state land which were under Petrotrin's control available to employees of Petrotrin who were subject of this separation. We took some time to find the appropriate lands, to do the work that was required, and only recently I was able to tell Petrotrin workers that the commitment is being carried out, and we now do have acreage for the first phase of Petrotrin workers, those persons who are not owners of property at this time, first-time homeowners, they have claim to the first 1,000 lots. And then phase 2 will cover other workers. That is underway, a commitment being kept to Petrotrin workers, as it was kept to the Caroni workers. Today, just over a year since we restructured this company, we look back at what it was. We analyzed the company. We didn't take this action capriciously. We analyzed the company. We looked at all the options. And after using the best talent, international and local, the bottom line was that the best possibility that we could have anticipated and looked forward to, going forward here, seeing what has happened before, the best projection for the refinery at Petrotrin was that it will continue to lose a minimum of $2 billion a year going forward. That's what we found. That's what the projection was. I know there are those who will tell us that we should have left it like that. But it had been left like that before. I just told you, because it was left like that, it ran up billions. But in this period, this was the period when the debt was coming up. The debt arrived here to be paid here. We had to act. And while the company was running up these losses, its legal responsibilities to the Minister of Finance, to the Exchequer, to pay taxes on its operations, to pay royalties on its operations, to pay statutory payments like VAT and supplementary petroleum tax. Those were not being paid. So basically, the company was breaking the law as it was using up all that it earned. It was being said that taxes were a matter of massa bull, massa cow. So it doesn't matter if taxes are paid or not. That is no way to run a state enterprise, especially if you're borrowing foreign money. It has to be paid. Because if you run it like that, the payment falls to the Minister of Finance, who then would have to find the resources from health, from education, from road construction, from public debt to service that. And that is not a fair arrangement when there's a fix that's available. So by 2018, we took the decision. And of course, this situation here, where we made the right choice, and the hard decision was made here. So 2019, the coming of heritage, this situation has been transformed from a $2 billion a year loss projection to a profit of $1.5 billion in its first year. And while that is so, the taxes and royalties that were not being paid to the Treasury are being paid. And of course, many of the employees who were furloughed, who were retrenched, separated in the restructuring, many of them were engaged at Heritage. Heritage has an employee level now of just over 800 people and will continue to grow, because this arrangement of looking for oil, finding oil, selling oil at a profit is what Trinidad and Tobago's involvement in the oil business ought to have been, and which it is now. So the projections going forward into 2020, 2021, 22, and forward is that we would be in this situation as against this situation. But this is the point. In 2019, 2018, 2020, when this government restructured Petrotrin and did what the country always wanted to do. The refinery is there. We made it by public international exposure and invitation to any person, available to any person or entity who can put a proposal to the government that can pass muster to succumb to robust examination, because a refinery is not a chemistry set. To operate a refinery, to bring back a refinery is big business, and it requires serious financial outlay. And the longer the refinery remains there unattended, is the more difficult it is to restart and to bring it back. Many refineries go down and never come back up. Today, there are about 17 refineries around the world that went down, some in our own region, which have no chance of coming back. The OWTU, through its company Patriotic, took part in that process, was rigorously examined, and was found to be the best option available in the process, and the government has been working with the OWTU along the way, and the government is committed, as long as the conditions are met, satisfactory to the public interest, the taxpayer interest, that the government will work with OWTU to see if there's a possibility of them restarting operations at that refinery. Because if they do, by their investment, with or without government help, they manage to restart the refinery, all of us in Trinidad and Tobago are better off. And that's the government's commitment. I know that there are people in this country who will make a song and dance if we conclude this project now, as it is about to be concluded. My last advice is that we are one clause away from conclusion. Just so happens to be 2 weeks away from an election. I know that if we sign that document this week, that will be the talking point of many, to misrepresent. So as Prime Minister, I've made the commitment that the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which we will be on August 11th, the government will sign the document to the OWTU. And you can take that to the bank as long as the conditions are right. The government is committed to concluding the process with the OWTU. And there's a clear alternative on this situation. There are those who said that they will kill it, and they, as the state, will restart it. We believe that in the public interest, that non-starter should be rejected across the board. Whether you're a Petrotrin family or a person living in St. James or Tobago, it is not in our interest as a people to go back to a situation here where the taxpayer operates the refinery and the business to lose $2 billion a year simply because somebody wants to be popular with the taxpayer. That is no use to the taxpayer. What is in the taxpayer and the children's interest is to keep this, the benefit of the hard work that we have done. And today I want to thank the board of Petrotrin that worked with the cabinet to move this country from here to there. You know them by name. And they were patriots who came to the call, put their talent to bear, worked with the Minister of Finance. And that is the outcome. This is the best choice. And we are the best choice. Only a PNM government would have done that and could have done that. Because that's what the opposition members say to us quietly. You know, we couldn't do that. It's only all you could have do that. That's what they tell us silently, while they make silly noises for public demand and public consumption. Ladies and gentlemen, we are much better off today. And I want to ask one question before I leave this subject. Where would Trinidad and Tobago have been in this COVID environment if we had not rectified this? For that alone, we are the best choice. The manufacturing sector is one of the success stories of Trinidad and Tobago. Support initiated by the private sector, supported by the public sector. And today we are the powerhouse in the supply of manufactured items in the region. Our roadmap to recovery acknowledges that. And the recommendations are coming from our committee through our phase 1 recovery program is to provide swift access to the liquidity support programs of $300 million, which the Minister of Finance has provided to those who are engaged in manufacturing and required government help. And of course, it was recommended that we accelerate the VAT refunds. That figure I spoke of earlier on was one of the early actions of the government of doing this, where outstanding payments for VAT in that sector. That's been done. This $300 million is available. These recommendations have been accepted and we're on the way. And we are supposed to now prioritize the availability of $100 million for non-energy manufacturers, importers and essential supplies and reinsurance premiums. Not everybody has gone to the fountain, but the Minister of Finance has made additional foreign exchange specifically targeting those sectors of usage to service the country. Manufacturing should be seen in the context not only of export products, but job maintenance in our country. And of course, hopefully, those other persons in countries outside of Trinidad and Tobago who are also experiencing the ravages of COVID and its disruptions, those persons, we are anticipating that they too will have a good recovery, so as to be a market and continue to be a market for Trinidad and Tobago's produce. So we are supporting the manufacturing sector. We have put things in place to support them because we have said we're leaving no one behind. No one is being left behind. Our manufacturing sector is a major job maintenance, job creation area of activity. So the priorities in phase 1 will continue as such into phase 2. We anticipate that the phase 2 recommendations will be with us in a matter of maybe a week or two, which probably would be before the election we receive it, but we are already on that track. We are already on that pathway. We're committed to it. So whenever we receive it, we will proceed to action it as we have done with phase 1. Fellow citizens, when all is said and done, it cannot be truthfully said that Trinidad and Tobago is not a place where hope exists in copious quantities. What I have said to you in this report is but a part of what we have been engaged in. All of it difficult. Much of it so far attended with success. And it is for you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to remain hopeful that you have made the right decisions or had the right decisions made for you by those you put into office to act on your behalf. You've seen situations that were difficult, some thought impossible, but you've also seen solutions. You've seen grit and determination. You've seen honest action. We know that every day may not bring everything that you might want for yourself, but think about the children. Think about the neighbors. Think about the nation as a whole. And when you do that, I have every confidence that you would come to the conclusion that your business has been well handled. Your affairs are being well handled. Where there are threats, as COVID is a threat, you will dismiss frivolity, you will dismiss irresponsibility, and you will be serious. And you would know that the best government in office is one that puts the country's interests first. One that is committed to the wider national good. One that ensures that whatever we have, we do more with less. And we maintain, at the personal level, maintain our integrity, our self-respect. And at the national level, we feel that pride coursing through our veins when we say, we belong to the land of the red, white, and black. And for those of us in the political arena offering ourselves for office, as I am saying to you now, I represent the People's National Movement. This is our 65th year. And the one thing that is the same this year as it was in 1956 is that this party exists for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago. And in that context, I say to you, great is the PNM. Great is the PNM. Great is the PNM, and we shall prevail. Thank you for your attention.
Dr. Rowley, a leader phenomenal. On August 10th, vote PNM. Great is the PNM.